All right, thanks guys for joining us. We are in another Thursday session of Practical Discipleship. I've got Clay Davis to my right, Dan DeBruler to my left, and I'm Eric Gray standing in for Pastor Tony. So you both brought a subject. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Dan. We'll start.
All right.
I woke up and walked in here thinking about integrity. We see so much stuff going on, in the news and in political news and just everywhere we look that reeks of a lack of integrity, no moral baseline in people's lives. And as Christians, I've had somebody say to me before, I don't want to be one of your projects. When we're trying to reach them for Christ, I don't want to be one of your projects. I don't want to be a notch in your belt. And it's never been about that for me when I'm dealing with somebody one-on-one. It's because I genuinely care. I care about not just how they live, but what happens when they die. I care about the fact that they honor themselves and honor their commitments to their families and their marriages and be integrity driven at work. So I don't want them to be my project either. But the fact that, when we waver a little bit on integrity, people can see us like that. And so when I look at what's happening in political circles, and I'll bring this one thing out. It happened I don't know if it's last night or the night before last, that they were trying to get a stopgap measure to fund the government through March 28th, I think, of next year. They included a portion of the SAVE Act, and basically I agree with the SAVE Act. So it's not that, but their attitude after it didn't pass was that, I'll just quote Mike Johnson here so that I'm just making things up. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said, the play we ran tonight was the right play. So we go back to the playbook and we drop another play and we come up with a solution. So what they're doing, they knew that this would stop the budget from passing. I feel like they were fairly certain that putting this thing in front of people one more time and putting it in a bill, which really comes down to ensuring that you are a U.S. citizen to vote in federal elections. I agree with that 100%. You should be a citizen to vote. You should be a shareholder to vote what happens with the company, and same thing with our country. You need to be part of that to vote what happens with that. And so they put it in there. And really the whole idea, when you get right down to it, the whole idea was to make sure people didn't forget that this is an issue. And this is the issue that a particular party is working with. And my issue is the fact that they're playing it like a game. And they're even calling it a game when they say, we ran a play and it didn't work. So we'll get another play together and we'll be right back.
Right. So
too much?
No, not at all. I do want to point out what you said will be is often twisted, and they'll say, "Oh, that's already a thing. You already have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in an election." But you're talking about they were specifically trying to put in a measure that would enforce the verification.
Right,
Right,
and that's the problem. That's why they're trying to get it back in front of people. They're trying to remind us it's there because while it is a law, it's not an enforceable law the way it's written right now. So they're trying to get this SAVE Act passed because it's already passed the House. They've already said you have to be a citizen to vote, but they have no way to enforce that, and that's what they're trying to make sure that we don't forget about. But again, playing a game to make sure, pulling a maneuver so that it stays in front of people and we can dangle it as a token in this whole thing.
Well, and we think about it, that when it was originally done, the thought was the enforcement would fall to the states. The states are the ones that handle the elections within their states. And it wasn't an issue because typically, you had to be a citizen to vote. You had to have a driver's license. Well, you had to have a birth certificate to get a driver's license. So therefore, we could use the motor voter registration idea where when you go to get your driver's license, you automatically register to vote. And then we've seen places around the country, cities and some where they've started allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections. Now, our Constitution allows for states and localities to do that.
Within their local elections.
Within their local elections. The problem is, when's the last time you went to vote and were handed one ballot for all of the local stuff and another ballot for all of the federal elections.
You weren't.
You weren't. You get one ballot, so then that becomes, well, if I've got a ballot, I can fill out the entire ballot. Mm-hmm. And then how do we keep those votes from being counted at the state or federal level if it's only a locality? So this therein becomes the issue. The reason that it's, and even with the SAVE Act enforcement, we're only talking about registering to vote and maybe voting in some places, but really that's left up to the states how they enforce all of that. Right?
Yeah, and to keep this from being merely a political thing, the reason I brought it up was not for the sake of politics. It's for the sake of integrity in leadership. I've shared with you guys privately. I've had people who I was, for lack of a better term, evangelizing. People that I was working with and trying to move them toward the gospel. Toward the gospel for their own good in their own lives and in their families. And I had somebody respond one time, look, I don't want to be one of your projects. Yeah. And I thought, why would you even say that? Because so many people had maneuvered and played a game and maybe they followed the steps or the playbook or the 5 steps to whatever on a little guide in their back pocket. But, in reality, this particular person, I was being genuine. I was genuinely being their friend and was honestly concerned. And as they expressed some of the things going on in their life, I was expressing solutions through becoming a person of more integrity by embracing the gospel. I was not, they were never a project. It was never a game for me. But I feel like sometimes people look at us, the church, and think we're just gaming things. That we're saying one thing on Sunday morning and doing another thing on Sunday afternoon or Monday.
We have come in, especially in the American cultural context, we've come to a point where we expect a certain level of duplicity.
Oh, yeah. We're waiting for, what's the hook?
Right? Whoever we're dealing with, whether it's our political leaders, whether it's our church leaders, whether it's our boss, our employer at work, whatever it is, we expect, and we've come to accept, and I would dare say as the church, we've come to be comfortable with a certain level of duplicity that comes all the way down to the individual. I was talking the other day about something I heard on the radio that ties into this integrity. This was a radio program that I listen to frequently, radio host that I agree with a majority of the time.
Sure. And
I've always been calling for less government. For the government needs to get out of these things. Would be one of those that says that we need to do away with the Department of Education, and we need to get the government out of our lives. But on this particular day, they're discussing the Titan submersible.
Yep.
That just over a year ago, the 5 people died because it imploded, and they were discussing that in the Coast Guard hearings into what went wrong and all of that. And now all of a sudden they're calling for, we need more government regulation and more government involvement. Well, which one is it? We can't pick and choose. My mind immediately goes to a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. And I think if we're not careful, we fall into that trap of, we've become so comfortable with a certain level of duplicity that we allow it even in our own lives.
Yeah, well, I think there's this thing that really doesn't ever get discussed is the government has numerated powers and enumerated. Like there's specified authorities for certain echelons of government, and because it's not specified, it's not for them, right? And so we got to decide. We got to go back to that. What does the government have authority for? And a lot of times people want to use government to decide or to enforce a protection from themselves.
We've given up almost completely in the American culture the concept of personal responsibility.
Right. Well, but we hand that. Oh, you have to hand it over to somebody.
We say we've given it up, so it's not my fault. The government's now at fault because the government didn't have the safety regulations and have all of this in place. It comes down to that idea of personal responsibility.
Well, and so we even kind of practice this here, right? Like, so a lot of times, like, okay, you'll have a one-off situation occur. Like, I don't know, a submarine not coming up from the depths of the ocean. But like, let's create a policy because this happened one time. You know, the 99.9% of the time, when submarines go down, they come up. You know, when you put a boat on water, unless the guy's driving it or drinking, or they fell asleep at the wheel, it makes it from point A to point B unless the engine fails. But we have one-off situations and be like, oh, we got to create a policy for that. We have to enforce on that, and so that with that comes obligated dollars, which we don't have in the first place. Now we got to create a new department or put it under a department that's already maxed out in its capacity. So we have to hire more people to be able to do that, and we create all these regulations, and anytime you create a regulation, you got to have a way to enforce it and a way to penalize it for people not complying, and what one good idea fairy that came and said, hey, we really ought to think about this, that was never countered by, you know what, we really ought to think about not doing that, because what's the cost that comes with it? The cost that everybody has to take on for that little good idea is too much for the benefit that does come with it. I mean, that good idea is founded in wanting to help people, wanting to protect people, wanting to do a good thing. But the cost-benefit analysis says it's not worth it, you know? But we're so quick to move, and nobody counters that with, look at what's going to come. Look at what this turns into in 10 years, you know? I mean, we had a reaction to 9/11, and we put in the Patriot Act, and people were sounding the alarm, saying, look what it's going to do. It's going to give the government, you know, more ability to do this and that. We do this again and again and again, and we do the same thing, even just in the church, right? Like, person comes in and does a certain thing, says a certain thing, like, oh, we ought to create a policy for that. You know, thankfully, we have a boss that's like, no, we're not going to create policy based on a one-off. We're going to improve our practices to be able to handle those kind of situations and realize that they're a one-off. We're not going to do a knee-jerk reaction and policy creation that involves elder decision-making and all these things that now becomes enforceable on everyone. We're going to make wiser decisions in how we navigate something.
That doesn't mean we don't step back and look at the situation and do an after action and see what could we have done differently, but you don't necessarily change. Again, that's us taking responsibility for.
Right.
Not saying we have to put a policy in place or make this, you know, it comes back to that as us as individuals. You know, our government is still supposed to be we the people. You know, we elect, but I think we have to go back to it and be careful, because we can only control what we can control. When we see these situations where it's apparent duplicity in another individual, well, am I accepting duplicity in my life? You know, it starts there. Or am I accepting duplicity from those around me? Because we've become comfortable with it. We almost expect that politicians are going to make promises and they're not going to keep them. We expect that you know, people are going to say things and oh well.
And what did you go back to yesterday? Was it yesterday as we were discussing this? 2 days ago, I guess. Let your yes be your yes and your no be your no, right?
Right.
We don't need to be compelled into, you know, speaking a vow or making a contract. Like, just be simple about your speech. Be a man of your word, like God is. Be a woman of your word. And if everyone would just practice that simple thing, we wouldn't need lawyers and laws and insurance, and like, people would just uphold their responsibilities, right? So very unlikely that in a sinful world with sinful people with, you know, hurt by past experiences that we won't need those things. Those things are important to an extent, but we as Christians, we should navigate that in a different way. We should always go back to the personal responsibility, the self-examination, the self-control, and exercising wisdom found in God's word on how to handle so many of those situations we encounter, right?
Yeah, and speaking of the wisdom of God's word, you know, in line with duplicity, we're reminded that one man's story sounds good until you hear the other man's story. So when you come to the table and you're working toward policy based on a one-off event, maybe everything that's coming is good, but if you haven't heard the rest of the story, if you don't understand what else is going on, you are just simply being duplicitous. And think of how that works out in the culture. I mean, people by and large only know what they just heard. The wind blows one way and they're on because that story sounds good. Then the wind blows the other way and they're on that side of the coin because it sounds good once again. Imagine doing marriage counseling with just one of the people in the marriage. Everything that they're saying sounds really good. Man, you're right. You guys should get a divorce. Absolutely. But if you got both of them in the room with you, and they're able to air these things, and we're able to hear both sides of the story, we can make a more wise decision, and we can make more wise suggestions for them to move forward as a married couple. And the same thing with policies. I mean, let's look back, just the history of the last 100 years. We had the first automobile roll off the line, and man, they were about as unsafe as you could imagine. I mean, they hadn't even figured out how shock absorbers could help out at the time they rolled them off. But now, we have safety glass because we have seen, there are studies that show how people were hurt again and again by going through the windshield or by being cut by glass. We have safety belts that keep people restricted and restrained. At one point, that was just one man's story until it became a trend and we began to understand things. So we get making policies, but we didn't make policies based on one-off things, and neither should we make decisions based on a one-off situation. We certainly shouldn't be making policy based on that.
Oh, so wait. So on a minor level, does that mean I shouldn't dictate my relationship with somebody based on a one-off event? I shouldn't write somebody off because there's a one-off event.
No, you should not.
No.
So even in the policy of conducting, intimate two-person relationships, I can't use the one-off. I have to look at the pattern of behavior, and if they're consistently reliable, trustworthy, honoring, that's the true character. If they've messed it up and they went far right or far left on an issue, or they lost their cool and blew up, that's the one-off. And so that doesn't dictate the policy on how I'm going to handle my relationship with them moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about when they said, they asked Jesus, well, if my brother sins against me, how often do I have to forgive? And 7 times not enough. I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. Jesus said, no, 7 times 70. Yep. Okay, that's 490 times.
I'm keeping score. 491.
But I mean, not that we're supposed to keep score, but it's just this idea of we don't set our boundaries in what we allow and how we allow people to be in our lives based off of a one-time thing.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Because I worked for a company one time, and I was the general manager, and I could hire and fire anybody in the store except my assistant manager. And it was explained this way, that because if you work together long enough, you're going to get mad at each other. Mm-hmm. Mm. And so we don't allow you that authority to fire them, because it's going to happen at some point. You're going to get mad. They're going to do something. They're going to mess up.
Right.
Now, there was a process in place if they messed up over and over and over, but it wasn't this one-time thing. We can't just, think about it. God hasn't written us off yet.
I'm way past 7 times 70.
Yeah, me too. So he hasn't written us off. We can't do that to others.
I think when you read through the book of Acts, you could easily surmise that if we based our relationships and our efforts off of encountering resistance one time, or somebody who didn't agree with us one time, the gospel would not have gone very far. It wouldn't have gotten out of the region over there. No. Because these people who were initially spreading the gospel, they were hated, they were beat, they were imprisoned, they were run out of town, and it's because they stuck to the truth and they kept telling the truth and telling the story. Just like with my friend, I was not running the game on him. He was not a project. He was a friend. I was now encountering resistance. He's still a friend. because I didn't back down from his rejection of the notion. I was able to remain salt and light, and I tried my best not to lose my flavor, but he had to have encountered somebody along the way who had lost their flavor, who failed to be light, who was only light when it was convenient, for him to consider me or consider that I might have him as a project.
Or they brought correction without love. Right?
That happens.
Or they were just focused on the behavior versus the person kind of stuff that I think we talked about yesterday. So many instances on why that could have happened and why you. So how'd you handle it? Because I loved how you said it. Right. I don't just care about how you live. I care about what happens when you die. Perfect way to phrase it. How did it pan out after the initial accusation? Was it cut off? Did they make their decision to policy? And was it their policy? I'm cutting you off. Like, you can't continue to engage me in this way.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
I think my honesty bore itself out. In that relationship. Like I said, we're still friends now.
Oh, nice.
I remember. I remember telling this person over lunch, and this is probably after that event, I was going to wherever on a mission trip. And, he jokingly said, "Oh, so now you're going to go shove the Bible down their throat?" I'm like, well, no, not exactly. Could you pass the biscuits? But because we became friends, and it's okay to disagree. If you're going to have a relationship with somebody, like Clay implied, he could fire anybody except the assistant manager, because if you work together long enough, if you are in a relationship long enough, you're going to disagree somewhere along the line, and you're not going to see everything exactly the same. But, I'm talking about the gospel here. When we bring it back to what the Word of God says, when we bring the truth back to the truth, and we are being bearers of that salt and that light in our lives, it's a whole different thing.
And we do need to understand and expect that we're going to be misunderstood.
Oh, sure.
We're going to be at times possibly mistreated. I don't know that any of us have experienced true persecution. I know what we get here in the United States is we get unfriended on Facebook and
we see mean people.
Yeah, we see mean people, but we don't see the type of true persecution, physical persecution that they see. But we also have to understand that when Jesus sent them out 2 by 2, he said, if they don't receive you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why we got this perspective that people assume that the church and Christians are trying to shove the Bible down people's throats. Well, first of all, I think you said something about communicating the truth without love. Yep. We have to communicate that we're sharing this, but it's because we love them enough to tell them the truth. When you think about love never seeks its own. Love does the hard things. Love does the tough things, and sometimes it's tough to speak truth into a situation. It'd be much easier if we could just keep our mouths shut,
no
or if
conflict,
we could,
right?
No conflict whatsoever. And because sometimes somebody's hurting, and everything happens for a reason. Sometimes the reason is we're stupid and we make bad decisions. I mean, that's just.
It's true.
It's true. So it would be so much easier. But we have to speak the truth. But we have to live the truth. Again, it comes back to this integrity versus duplicity. It's become assumed that you are in some way, at some level, duplicitous in our culture. So
yes.
whoever you're dealing with, they're viewing us the same way. That's where it comes from. I don't want to be your project. If nothing else, it's just from the assumption that there's a duplicity there, that we're trying to be something we're not, or we're trying to get you to be something we're not willing to be. And it comes back to integrity. Are we willing to live a life of integrity even when it costs us something?
And integrity will cost you something somewhere along the line. In business, it will cost you everything, every bit of the mistake you made. When you owe up to it, or you own up to it rather, it'll cost you. It'll cause you to admit to things that nobody else saw. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you do something, you cause harm, and they don't even realize it was you, and you go back and you say, hey, this thing, it's me, man, and it'll cost you. It'll cost you in that moment, but the integrity that plays out, the integrity that is seen in those moments, is worth more than any momentary guilt or shame. A guilt is when you do something wrong and you're aware of it. Shame is when you think there's something wrong with you because you did that thing. We don't need to bear shame to live out a life of integrity, but we do need to admit guilt when we're guilty.
Amen. It's funny. I'm sitting here listening to Clay say that a minute ago about integrity and duplicity. I'm 43 years old, and I've never, as much as I've been married to I want to be as full of integrity as possible, and I want to avoid duplicity, I've never put the two together as they're the opposing concepts or forces for each other, right? So if you're duplicitous, you lack integrity. If you got integrity, you're avoiding duplicity. But literally never connected the two in that. Just, always knew I had to go for one and not the other. Just things that
So our little project worked.
That's right. That's what you guys got me here for today. All right, so I'll stop being duplicitous. Man, I'll tell you, man, that whole duplicity thing, that is the expectation that we wouldn't be and that we would be full of integrity. There was a time when I'd kind of shared with Tony in the foyer years ago. I was like, yeah, well, I ended up getting out of the Army because of this thing. And he's like, he didn't even hesitate. He's like, oh, I never really would have figured duplicity is a thing for you. I was like, oh, man, that hurt. But it's what it was, I was talking out of one side of my mouth this way, and literally 2 seconds later, I'd start with another statement that would be completely counter to that. So it's destructive to the person, destructive to any relationship you want to be in, and any trust that you want to gain with somebody, you're going to lose in that duplicitous fashion. So,
and unfortunately, we have seen the media loves a story full of duplicity. Mm-hmm. They love to sometimes we're such a society that reads headlines, not realizing headlines are just clickbait these days. And you see a story about, youth pastor charged with sexual assault or something, and you go and read the article, and this guy hasn't served in a church in 20 years, and this event didn't occur. But the media is full of stories, and unfortunately, they're not making them up. There are. I just saw a story this morning about a worship pastor that had a camera in the bathroom, and okay. Unfortunately, the church, capital C church, individuals, we've made it easy for them to highlight stories of duplicity. And so it feeds into this narrative. So we have to encounter and deal with the fact that a lot of people out there are going to look at us as Christ followers and assume that there's some level of what we do doesn't match what we say.
And that's the danger of this, right? So as life goes on for each one of us and we encounter more and more duplicitous people or highlights about a person's duplicitous nature at one point in their life, whatever, everybody loses credibility. And so I think we've probably encountered it. You run into somebody who they want to be all in. They want to be, but they don't know how to be all in. They come in skeptical. Mm-hmm. Can I trust this person? They can't enter the relationship fully because they're keeping one foot out the door because they don't know that they can trust someone. And so as Christians, we're part of that love factor is to believe the best. And I think if we're to benefit from a relationship with somebody or an entity, the body of the church, we have to be willing to say, I'm going to believe the best until proven otherwise. And obviously, when proven otherwise, we shouldn't close our eyes to it. We shouldn't turn away from it. We shouldn't cover it up because that's not what we're called to do. But if we aren't willing to believe the best, we never actually allow ourselves to connect and receive all that can be beneficial for us in that relationship. And so go ahead.
Even if we've been proven wrong, mm-hmm. At some point, we have to go back and give that individual a chance to prove that they've changed.
Agreed.
Okay?
Yes.
at some point you have to open the door for them to reveal whether they have truly changed or not. That's why first of all, being proven wrong doesn't happen the first time they mess up or do something. That's we've already addressed that. But when you said that, I can I've been that way in the past. I'm going to believe the best until you give me a reason not to.
Yeah.
And that having a reason is not being proven.
Well, and that's the other thing is like until you prove me wrong, right? But that doesn't mean I go looking for proof. And so many, unfortunately, people have been hurt by church, or they've seen an article, they've been given a reason to distrust the church or any other organization. But we care a great deal about people's comfort and willingness to attach in the church, and so they leave that church, or they spend years away, and then they come to a new one. And we experience this all the time. So many of us ended up here because we had to leave somewhere else for whatever reason, right? Maybe we were just shipped here. And we come in skeptical. Give me a reason and I'll leave. That's the new culture. You give me one reason and I'm out. One reason and I'm out. It doesn't matter that the other 51 weeks a year we were in agreement and you believed everything I said from the pulpit, or you were okay with how everything was conducted in the worship session. I don't like what the social media post was. I don't like this thing. Excuse me. One event. We ignore the actual overall culture. We ignore the consistency in the sermons and the teaching of the word. So you had this one event and I'm out. Not can we talk about it? Can you help me understand? Maybe I'm missing something. It's we immediately don't believe the best. That's no longer our commitment. That was like, I'll try believing the best. But the second that the veil's been lifted and you show me that you're a little different than I thought, or you say something I don't agree with, I'm cutting bait.
Well, that's somebody that comes in, and I've done this before. I've come into a church going,
I think we've all done it.
Going, I know there's something wrong here. I know there's something's not going to line up. There's a mess somewhere here, and I'm going to be on guard for it. And when you're looking for it, you're going to find it. You're going to find. I mean, it's just like anything. I forget the name. The psychologists they have a term for it, but it's kind of like when we bought, our last car. It was a Subaru. Jennifer said she never noticed how many Subarus are on the road until we got one. All of a sudden now you're seeing stuff everywhere.
Same thing.
It's the same thing. If you come in expecting to find it, you're going to start seeing it everywhere.
Now, did you guys buy Subaru because Subaru is love and God is love? So Subarus, no?
No, we
Okay. I just want to make sure.
We bought a Subaru, honestly, because of we bought it after my wife had been in a pretty serious car wreck.
That's right, yeah.
And so safety and the safety features and their ratings and all of that were very important to her. And so that's why we went with a Subaru.
Right on.
But that's that's for us. But once again, it's the idea that once we had one, now we're seeing all of this stuff. Once you start looking for it, I never will forget back during the all the George Floyd and all of that, and somebody asked a question of somebody that said they were seeing racism everywhere. And they ask him a question. I have to ask you, are you believing it because you see it, or are you seeing it because you believe it? If you believe something's everywhere, you're going to see it everywhere.
Well, I mean, we'll just start naturally coloring in the instances we see with the beliefs we already have, right? I mean, that's a belief system. That's no different than our faith, right? So when we go looking for God, all of a sudden we can recognize Him in all the little things in our lives, right?
There you go.
Giving Him credit. And it's so easy to get off topic, and we can focus on any issue in this world, and we lose sight of God because we're looking for that. We lose hope. We lose our connection. And then before we know it, we don't even know where we are anymore. We're so far from Him. And He's no longer the answer. We've got to fix this issue Meanwhile, the issue is if we would all just get back to God, if the three of us were just so fully committed to loving like God said, there'd never be an issue that couldn't be resolved, that couldn't be taken care of, that wouldn't end in a handshake and a hug afterwards, you know. If we're in alignment about what God says about the world and about human beings, we'd probably never be in disagreement unless we just misunderstood what somebody said, you know.
Yeah, being a person of integrity implies that there is a certain standard. There's a standard by which you measure your right and your wrong, the integrity in your own life. And, we need to believe that we are, as Jesus described us, that we're a city on a hill. And he says, a city on a hill can't be hidden. We are going to be seen. You know, if we are claiming that the truth of the gospel is our moral compass, if we're saying God's law is the law that we want to follow, God's right and wrong are my right and wrong, when we waver, we need to assume that we are that city on a hill and somebody's going to see it. And we need to be careful about not being like what we see so often in the news. You know, we read a story, we say, I cannot believe that guy did that, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then you look and you find out it happened when he was in high school in 1968, and you realize, oh, well, they were making it sound like it happened last week, this thing. But, you know, when they find themselves, I say they, when people find themselves in a leadership position, they need to assume whether or not it's the godly standard that they hold to be true. They're going to be cities on a hill of some kind. They're going to be visible for what they do. And people are looking. We love a story that makes somebody else worse than us, you know, and that's where this duplicitous mindset comes from. Well, I'm not as bad as them anyway, you know, and we begin to act differently than we speak.
That's because we don't understand God's perspective on sin. We've bought into we take the same theory that we apply to criminal justice and we apply it to sin now. You know, in the criminal justice system, you have misdemeanors and you have different degrees of misdemeanors, and you have felonies and you have different classes of felonies, because we don't want the person we don't want the person that stole, you know, shoplifted, you know, the candy bar. We don't want them put to death. You know, we don't want the murderer to get a slap on the wrist either. We have these different degrees. But when God sees sin as sin, I know that's hard for some people to grasp, that lie, that little white lie we used to call it, is in God's eyes is just as bad as murder. You know, it said regarding the law, if you're guilty of just breaking one, you're guilty of it all. And we don't understand, so we get caught in this idea that, well, I'm not as bad as Eric is, so I'm okay. You know, like we're going to stand before God one day and he's going to line me and Eric up side by side. And okay, I got one slot open. Only one of you is going to get it.
You're out. There's only 144,000 seats,
you know,
right? That's what we heard.
You know, my luck, I would be standing next to Billy Graham or somebody like that if it was on a comparative scale. But it's
like,
not.
Oh, come on.
It's not on a comparative scale. And we want to do that. And oftentimes we want to do that because we know there's something wrong in our life. Okay. We recognize there's a sense of duplicity or a lack of integrity, and so we make ourselves feel better that while, yes, what I'm doing is bad, well, it's not as bad as what Dan's doing, so I must be okay.
Yeah. So I want on the what does integrity look like? I was having a conversation with one of our friends, Aaron Griffin. We had recorded a session. We were talking about integrity and what that looks like. And so if our switcher can zoom in, I don't know, but if they can at least focus in on this real quick. There's when you're zeroing your weapon, when you're in the Army, I don't know about the Navy, if they do any shooting, but when you're in the Army and you go zero your weapon, it initially starts out looking like this. You usually get, out of 3 shots, 2 are decently close together based on breathing technique, but there's a third one. It's usually the second shot is way off. And so the integrity is like those 3 gunshots on the target. They represent your home life, your church life, your work life. You know, assimilate that to whatever your 3 main identities are, right? However you behave and speak, right? But integrity looks like when you get your shot group tightened up. And so those 3 things, those 3 identities have less distance between them. They're closer and closer together over time. Essentially, that good marksman is going to have one hole that 3 bullets went through, right? And so that's our goal with integrity, is to line up those 3 identities. That when I go here and I'm with these people, they see the same person as when I go here and I'm with these people, and they see the same person as when I'm here. Whether you got 3 main cultural points that you're in, or 6, whatever it is, we all wear different hats and we fit in the community differently, right? But that grouping of those points would be closer and closer over time. It's not something we're going to hit right away. There's practices and conversations that take place in the different settings that just don't marry up with each other all the time. But we've got to be honest with ourselves. That's an integrity portion of self-examination. What am I doing differently? Why am I behaving differently? When I'm around this person, why do I allow this language to come out of my mouth? When I'm around this person, why do I allow myself to behave in this way?
And that's a great example. But in that example, you actually have a concrete way to measure where you are.
I do. Yep.
And it's talked about in leadership all the time, the need for 360-degree feedback. It may be that you need to take it on yourself and you can find these all over the internet, 360-degree feedback form, and ask the people in these different circles, have them fill that out so you can see where you really are. Because again, the easiest person for me to lie to is myself, and say that I'm okay, I'm living that consistently, but am I really? And I've had to do those 360-degree feedbacks, and it can be eye-opening. It can be reassuring. It can also cause you to have to step back and go, okay, where am I? What am I doing differently here with this group than I am with that group? We can't just sit back and assume that we're coming across and we're truly being that same person.
No, agree. Yeah, and so that could be, man. Your kids look at you and think, man, you really got your finances lined up. Yeah, talk to my accountant. Your spouse thinks you work really hard. Okay, check with my boss. Let's see. Well, but you're gone at work all the time. So easy for us to, or so hard for us to get that real feedback from somebody, because we want to make sure that's honest, true, calibrated feedback from that person, that they have a true perspective on that. And but so useful when we do get it, to be able to turn back, say, you know what, I need to turn the dial back on this. I need to turn the dial up on that one to be able to get where I want to be the person I say I am. And that was the beauty of Jesus taking on, that human body. Is he said, you know what, I'm this way in word. I say this thing about how to behave and how to conduct yourself and what love is and what I expect of you. And then he comes and he shows us that he is who he says he is, right? And so he demonstrates that the expectations are possible for anybody willing to follow the Spirit, right? I mean, and he highlights, I think on more than one occasion, they let us peer into the mind of Jesus and what the flesh wants, but ultimately that he's willing to follow the Spirit, So that's the integrity piece for us, is the body wants to do this one thing, but we have to follow the Spirit, and we cannot divide ourselves from that. So we're 44 minutes in. Are we at closing comments? Is that
I think we can wrap up from here.
Right. Dan?
Well, taking it back to the shot group analogy, a lack of integrity or embracing and living out duplicity in our lives, all in what we do, what we say and what we do being different. It's like firing one shot at the target, firing the other two completely off target, and wanting people to look at that one shot as if that's your whole life, because, like you said, ultimately the desire is that there's one hole. But if we're firing two completely off target, that's duplicity, but we're acting like everything, my shot group is so tight that there's only one hole.
Yeah, it just comes down to, for a Christ follower, our goal, the goal of a disciple. The disciple has 3 goals. I'm borrowing this from from somebody else, but it's to be with the master, to become like the master, and do what the master did. Jesus said, greater works will you do. Well, we can't just walk around hanging everything on that promise. We have to spend time with the master and become like the master. Becoming like Jesus means that shot group will be one whole. We put all three shots, but you'll have that unified life, so that you don't have to worry about how you act with this group versus that group. Just becomes who you are. Mm-hmm. And then that also becomes very empowering, because there are a lot of decisions that become very easy. Because who you are, you're not going to participate in certain activities. You're not going to speak in certain ways. You're not going to be a part of certain conversations. It's just who you are. And then it becomes nice when you get to the point where those conversations won't even happen around you. As Christ followers, we should be excited when we walk in a room and the conversation stops.
The light repels the darkness.
That should be a good thing. We don't feel dejected and hurt because they left you out. Be glad that they left you out of that conversation. They knew the moment your presence was made known that conversation had to stop, and they stopped. We can get there.
We can. So I think we're all three in agreement. Integrity can be achieved, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to remember, and we need to voice to others that God is not just a judge; He's a father. And so we're all three fathers. We know what it is to look at our children when they've done the right thing, when they've made the right choice, they made the hard choice, and that pride, that esteem for your child just wells up inside you. When you see them stand against the world and say, I'm going to do the right thing regardless of what it costs me. And so if we feel that way and we're imperfect, and while He's perfect, how much more does that fill His heart when He sees us do the right thing? And so I would say to anyone listening, we can achieve this. And when you achieve this, you please your Father. But the other side is if you're willing to continue to be duplicitous, that's like, to go back to the game analogy, right? That's like going to what's a hostile crowd? Seahawks are like known for their fan base. You go to a Seahawks game wearing a Seahawks jersey, but you're rooting for the 49ers. You stand out. It draw, like, you say you're part of one team, but you behave like another, right? So we really need to make sure that if we're going to claim that we're Christians, we're living up to the standard projected and demonstrated, personified through Jesus Christ. Otherwise, we probably ought to just take the jersey off for a moment, get it right, and come back to the game later. Good. So thank you guys for joining us. We look forward to seeing you guys next week. We'll be here Sunday. Let us know if you guys have prayer requests. We'll look those up for you.